a welcome support for many citizens. Couple things to remember as we talk about SERB, right? Or the initial period was 16 weeks, so people would be coming up to the end of that period here fairly shortly. I think July 4th would kind of be the technical end date. There are some unique circumstances where those people who were on employment insurance at the time of around March 15th might have jumped over to the SERB program early, just automatically through employment insurance, and then they may have received an upfront payment of $2,000. So those people may actually stop receiving payments for this next period. So they may have received their last cash payments already. But we expect by end of week or certainly early next week to have more details on how the SERB is going to move forward into this extended 8-week period.
Okay, great, thank you. And again, just to refresh our memories on the discussion we had in relation to the SERB, on the last webinar we addressed the tax consequences of SERB payments. So can you refresh our memories on what those are?
Absolutely, absolutely. So the SERB, like employment insurance benefits and other benefits, is a taxable benefit. So what that means is it's income you're going to have to include on your tax return for year 2020 when you file, assuming next April, if we're back to regular deadlines. Now, the difference with the SERB versus some of the other normal kind of benefit payments is there's no withholding of tax on it. So that means each $2,000 payment is a gross amount that will be taxable. The difference being under employment insurance, you normally would have some tax withheld at source when it's paid to you. So if you were receiving theoretically a similar $2,000 benefit, they would withhold 15 or 20% tax or whatever is applicable to your scenario. And so what that means is at the end of the year, under an employment insurance scenario, you'll have had tax withheld to cover the tax on the benefit you've received. In an effort to get SERB out quickly, they didn't do that with this program. So people are going to have an addition to their income where there's been no tax withheld. Now, everybody's circumstance is going to be unique there, depending what other types of income they might have. But kind of in general terms, if you're low income, you've received $8,000 worth of SERB and you didn't have much other income during the year, you might not have much of a tax consequence. An alternative might be if you earned $30,000 of other income during the rest of the year, $8,000 of SERB income could result in $1,000 or $2,000 worth of tax for you. So I think that's something that people want to be prepared for when it comes time to pay their taxes next year.
Right, definitely. So sort of speaking about eligibility, are there things people that should be doing to ensure that they receive the appropriate benefits, specifically for seniors or those with new children, for example?
Absolutely. So as with many of the benefits that Canada puts out, a lot of those are driven by having filed a personal income tax return over the last year or 2 years. Now, what Canada has said is they're not going to stop paying things like the Canada Child Benefit or some of the seniors benefits or other amounts that they would pay based on income tax returns if you haven't filed your 2019 tax return, which, while technically was due June 1st, CRA had indicated there's no penalty or interest if you don't file then, as long as you file and pay by September 1st. So for all intents and purposes, September 1st is kind of the new tax filing deadline this year. But what that doesn't factor in is if your circumstances have changed significantly from 2018, you may be entitled to less of a benefit or more of a benefit. So I can think of some specific circumstances. If you had just had your first child or another child this year and you hadn't filed the tax return to maybe include that child, if you haven't gone through the application process for the Canada Child Benefit, you wouldn't receive the extra amount for that child. A similar circumstance maybe could arise for seniors, where you have to apply for OAS and you have to apply for the Guaranteed Income Supplement. Now, often that's tied in with the tax prep process. So if you just turned 65 in this year and you hadn't filed your tax return last year, you may not have started receiving OAS or the guaranteed income supplement, and so you wouldn't then have received those additional COVID benefits. So I think it becomes increasingly more important to get those returns filed. Certainly, there's a number of tools out there for people. You know, there's obviously tax preparers firms like MMP or other local organizations, and then there's also free software on Canada Revenue website to get things filed. So I think that's something important that people can keep on top of. Definitely the old age security piece. If you've turned 65 in the year, or your income's changed drastically, and you're in that bracket where you are receiving OAS and CPP benefits, make sure that you're reading up on the guaranteed income supplement and whether you should be applying for that as well.
Excellent, thank you for that. So since we posted that we would be scheduling this webinar for this evening, we offered citizens the opportunity to submit questions by email, and we did receive a number of questions, and that is a good segue into some of the more specific questions about SERB and how it fits into supporting fishermen. We've received some specific questions again around how the various programs related to the upcoming fishing season. So again, if you're just joining us, we have with us our panel this evening, Mr. Ryan Hales of MNP, and Director of Fish and Wildlife, Harry Nice, and Mr. Edward Desson, who's the Fisheries Manager, and Cheryl Moore, and Darren, our Executive Director, and Darren McCormick, our Deputy Director of Finance. So Ed, kind of leading into the questions again that we received, can you give us an update on what the outlook is for the upcoming fishing season? Do we know when the Department of Fish and Wildlife will allow the next round of fishing?
Sure, thank you, Bobby. That's a bit of a tough question, as we don't really always know what the fish are going to do. But our preseason forecast is below the historical average at around 350,000 sockeye we expect to come in. Now, the Fish and Wildlife Committee and the director have discussed this over the course of the winter and decided that if it comes in as per the preseason forecast, we would likely not have any sail fisheries, individual sail fisheries. So, of course, that's always subject to change. We can't really, that's our best guess, and we can't predict what the run will look like as it comes in. But so far this year, the run has been slow coming in, and we're just hoping for more fish. Now, in the event that the run materializes and we have a large number of fish, we would then look at sail fishing opportunities.
Okay, great, thank you. So just cross our fingers that those fish make their way up the Nass.
Yeah.
So again, another question that came in, of course, due to COVID-19, which resulted in the office closures to the public. How do fishers go about obtaining their permits for a potential fishing season?
Thanks again, Bobby. And at the moment, we have set up a temporary solution for renewing fishing licenses and obtaining new fishing licenses, where the individuals would contact Tanya Clayton, give them their citizenship number, and we can issue a temporary letter for 3 months to allow a Nisga'a citizen to fish. Now, if we get to the point where we have individual sail fisheries, that the fishers would require a permit to do so. And in that event, we would have to set up another similar type of situation or process where we could issue these permits by email or something, or possibly even regular mail. And we still haven't ironed out the details for that. Of course, there's a fee for the individual sales permit, and we would need to do some further work in that regard.
Okay, great. That's good to know. So contact Tanya Clayton. And of course, there is, if you don't have her contact information, there is a government employee directory on the Nisga'a Nation website as well. The site I just showed earlier, if you go to the government drop-down tab, and under Nisga'a government, it's the second from the bottom. It's called a contact directory. So another specific question that was asked was if I'm so it reads, sorry, if I am receiving the SERB and return to fishing before the end of the 4-week period, what does that mean?
That's a really good question, and I think it probably actually applies to people beyond just fishing as well. But certainly fishing is a potential if it does become open and people are able to fish for income. So you can, under the SERB, earn up to $1,000 in one of the 4-week periods and not have the SERB payment clawed back. So I think that is something, you know, depending on the timing of when you're returning to fishing or returning to work, that you would want to monitor. Now, if you think you're going to earn more than the $1,000, then the SERB would start to be clawed back. And there are mechanisms in place now where if you've identified that, you can go on and return the payment. Now, if you think you're going to have to repay the whole amount of the SERB for a 4-week period, there are a couple ways you can do that. So the first method of doing that would be to go onto the CRA. They have a My Account function there. So if you file tax returns and you've set up the My Account function, you can go on there and you can repay the funds. Another option would be to do it through your online banking. So if, say, yesterday I've received a SERB payment in my account, and then today I know I'm going back to work and I'm going to have to repay that amount, I could go log on to my online banking, choose Canada Revenue Agency as the payee, and then put in my social insurance number and make a payment back to Canada. And now they will deal with that so that at the end of the year, that payment that I've returned wouldn't be added onto my taxable income. I would receive a slip and that would be excluded from. So those are all things to consider. I think the other piece of that is that now with the 8 weeks extension, so 2 more 4-week periods, people are going to want to look at, are they going to be returning to work? Are they going to be able to go out fishing and have some income, and then maybe not be eligible for the SERB? And should they hold off on applying for the SERB? Now, certainly not everybody's circumstance will allow for that, but to the extent that that would work for you, and you think you are, or you know you are going back to work, that would make sense. And as things change, you can always apply retroactively. So if you say, hey, I'm going back to work next week, I'm not going to apply for the SERB, and then it turns out work falls through, you can apply retroactively for the same period you would have been eligible. And that application process is actually open until December 2nd of this year. So you can potentially go back at the end of the year and apply for a period you should have been eligible for. I don't think many people will get to that point, but it is available still. Oh, I think you're muted, Bobby.
Thanks, Ryan. So again, if you're just joining us, as we roll through these series of questions that we received by email in the last couple of days, you will have an opportunity as well if you have any questions for the panel. You'll note there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You could just simply pose a question to the panel there, and we will do our best to, pending time, to answer all of them should they all come in. So the next question that came in was specific to NLG. What funding has been offered to fishers? So I'm not sure if Ed or Cheryl wanted to tackle that one. Harry, unfortunately, is having trouble connecting to the audio. So hopefully we'll fix that for the next time.
Cheryl?
Or perhaps our Deputy Director of Finance, Mr. McCormack.
Thanks, Bobby. I can make reference to what Nisga'a government has done in the past, and I know it's under consideration for the future, subject to executive approval, of course. However, in the past, through funding provided to Northern Native Fishing Corporation, Nisga'a government has provided funding to registered Nisga'a fishers through a fund that we've established with NNFC. And as an example, last year, I believe it provided for approximately $3,500 per fisher, which would enable them to commence the season and pay for some basic fundamental essentials to get the boat going and get out on the water. Perhaps Cheryl has something further to add, but that's based on past practices.
Thanks, Darren. Yeah, that was something that we'll have to bring forward and discuss with the decision makers of the Sims government, as you stated. That's what we've done in the past. Our decision makers have been open to assistance, but I don't have a more definitive answer than that right now.
Okay, great. Thanks to you both. So, one sec. So Ryan, perhaps this is a question for you. What other programs are available to fish harvesters?
Yeah, I can certainly address that one. So, kind of in the recent weeks, there's been a couple announcements from the government of Canada about some programs that'll apply to fish harvesters and support the fishing industry. So there are some opportunities there. One called the Canadian Seafood Stabilization Fund that would apply to fish processors. Basically, it's funding that would allow them to adapt to COVID-19 circumstances. So if that meant adapting their processing plants or facilities to allow for safe work procedures or so on. And then a couple programs that I think probably are more relevant to those participating in this call would be the fish harvesters benefit. So this is a benefit that's applicable to self-employed fish harvesters or sharesperson's crew who cannot access the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, just because that has some exclusions that would not allow them to participate. And now what this means is if you're a self-employed fish harvester who runs a boat or a shareperson, but a crew who's running a boat, if you've seen a fishing income decline of greater than 25%, then the government of Canada has provided a program that will cover 75% of the decrease beyond that 25%. So that's a bit confusing, but the intent is that it provides a similar 75% of income subsidy that would be the same as the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, so up to $847 per week for 12 weeks. Now, the application for that is not yet online, but I think the expectation is that will be rolling out soon as we get into the commercial fishing season. Certainly, if you're in that case and you've got a commercial fishing license and normally would be out, and for various reasons you're seeing a decrease because of COVID, it warrants reaching out to your professional services provider probably for more information on that. And I know we will be updating the bulletin on the website once we get details on how to apply. The other program is the Fish Harvester Grant Program. Now, this is combined with a lending program similar to the Canadian Emergency Business Account, whereby you can borrow up to $40,000, and then potentially $10,000 of that through the Fish Harvesters Grant can be forgiven at the end of a loan if you meet some other terms and conditions. Now, how that loan works is you have to have a business with eligible expenses, so to make payroll, operating costs of maybe running a boat, insurance, things like that. And then if you have those expenses, you can borrow this money to pay those while you're having an income shortage, or if you need to borrow to get things ready for the season in anticipation of it starting up later. And that one can be done through your financial institution, and also there are some Indigenous specific lending institutions that, as the application processes come online, we'll include links to on the website. These are fairly new programs yet, so the formal application processes haven't been hammered out. I think certain fishermen or fisher people would be eligible for that regular Canada Emergency Business Account. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And then beyond that, there are some farm credit and mandatory isolation support for foreign temporary workers that I probably wouldn't suggest are applicable to this group. And then, as always, there's the employment insurance program. Now, the government has updated the employment insurance program for this year to allow fisher people to use last year's fishing income as support for this year's employment insurance claims, recognizing that normally those individuals would work for a season and then would be able to make an employment insurance claim, and if for some reason they're not able to work or only able to work part of the season, that would result in a reduced claim. So you're able to base that on your last year's income, which will provide some relief for people as well. And then also, to the extent that you've exhausted those programs and are still unable to find work due to COVID, there is the SERB that we've been talking about earlier as well.
Great, thanks for that, Ryan. And here's another interesting one. Further to the last question of in relation to SERB. So commercial fishermen who sell to Canfisco do not receive their income until after the season is over. So how does this fall into the eligibility criteria for SERB?
That's a great question. I think it just leads to the complexity of knowing when and what program to apply to. Now, certainly for someone who maybe doesn't know what their actual income will be until the end of the season and prices and volumes are set, that could result in difficulty. I think, as always, to the extent that you're able to, conservative is probably the best approach. So if there isn't an absolute need to apply for something like the SERB, then maybe you would want to hold off on doing that for the short term until you know what your season might look like. And as I mentioned earlier, there's that ability to go back and retroactively apply. And then I think in those circumstances where there is this bit of uncertainty around how the fishing season is going to start, that's where some of these other programs, the 75% subsidy for those seeing a reduction in fishing income, are likely more applicable. So I expect as we see that come online, that's going to make sense for a lot of commercial fishermen who maybe aren't able to go out to work right away because of COVID. That program will probably be more applicable than SERB.
Right. So to further assist these fishermen, Nisga'a fishermen, regardless if they participate in any sale fisheries, what other ways can they enhance their income tax filing to maximize a refund or to minimize what they might owe?
That's a really good and kind of fun question. So everybody wants to minimize the amount of tax they're going to pay, right? I think that's not that we want to avoid paying tax. Everybody's keen to pay their fair share, but less is always more when it comes to taxes. So I would encourage any self-employed fisherman to ensure they do some research there. The tax form is called a 2121 or 2121. And that is self-employed fisher person's income. And on there, it's a great little walkthrough, and it's got just some listing of the typical type of expense you might be able to claim. So things like obviously fuel, meals, and supplies for while you're out fishing, cost of transporting to and from your fishing site, so the use of a motor vehicle, cost of transporting your fish, and then further to that, there are expenses you can claim, not just the mileage or maybe the fuel cost of the vehicle, but the actual capital cost of owning say a pickup truck if you're using that to transport things around. So there are many different expenses like that. There's business use of a home office if you're keeping track of your records and doing those things at home. So I would encourage everybody to investigate using that form. As I mentioned, if you're keen to do your returns yourself, there's some reasonable software linked on the Canada Revenue website for preparing your own return that really helps facilitate that. Being a self-employed fisherman can make your return more complicated. So at certain times, that's a good time to reach out to a tax professional if you think you might be paying too much. And they can, at minimum, probably provide some advice on the type of expenses that maybe you haven't claimed in the past.
Great, thank you for that. So we've had a couple of questions come in from attendees tuned in this evening, and thank you for your questions. And we do have some time now to get into those. The first one is, and I think perhaps this may be for Ed. With COVID-19, I'm seeing an influx of people navigating to the valley to harvest domestic fish. Is there anything in place for the urban locals to gain food fish? If so, it could lend to slowing the commute of a large number of people or families to the valley.
Thank you, Bobby. And that's a great question. In the past, the urban local offices have asked the director for special consideration to receive a number of fish at their offices and then distribute to the Nisga'a citizens living in that particular locale. So we haven't been contacted by any of the urban local offices to date, but we expect that will happen. And it does happen on an annual basis. And so the urban locals contact a local fisher to do the fishing for them, and then that person would catch and deliver the fish to that urban local. So I think if any of the Nisga'a urban citizens want to obtain fish, it would be best to voice that to the urban local and say in the past those locals received, say, 2,000 sockeye, they may request further or a larger quantity depending on the demand. Now, I think I would like to put it to Cheryl in regard to access to the Nass Valley for individual fishers and for fishers taking, the harvesters taking fish out of the valley.
Thanks, Ed. Currently, the nation remains closed to outside citizens, so people who don't live in the valley, so non-residents, but they have allowed Nisga'a citizens who are coming back to harvest to be able to do that. So there is that opportunity to do so, but we have asked that citizens monitor their health to be sure that they're not feeling sick when they come in, and that we're all aware that transportation certificates are required when transporting fish, so there will have to be some discussion with the Fisheries Office in terms of how to receive those certificates, whether there is an individual in the communities or if there's an arrangement that can be made with the office with respect to receiving that, so that fish can be transported and in a lawful manner. Thanks.
Great, thank you both for that. And again, as Ed mentioned, we do have 3 Nisga'a urban locals that are in the city of Terra. That's the Kitlachdach Nisga'a Terra Society. In Prince Rupert, it's the Kitmachmakai Prince Rupert Port Edward local. And in Vancouver, it's the Nisga'a Vancouver Society, who all have historically provided for traditional seasonal foods to their citizens, which is an excellent initiative. And just before I get to the next question, I just wanted to make a short announcement that this team has scheduled for the next couple of weeks our next webinar, which will be June 24th, and that will be on support for Nisga'a businesses and taxation. And we will have guest panelists for that as well. Oh, good. I hear Harry has some audio now.
I got audio, but no picture.
Oh, that's tricky. It's good to hear you, though. Welcome back.
Trick.
And then on June the 30th, we have Anthony Moore, who's the Nisga'a Emergency Response Services Manager for Nisga'a government, and Brandy Trudell Davis, who's the CEO for Nisga'a Valley Health. They will be providing an overview of the Nisga'a Nation's reopen strategy. So be sure to tune into that and pass the word along on those upcoming events. And then on July 8th, we have the early childhood learning, K-12 and post-secondary education service providers, who will be providing an update on those respective areas of their service delivery. Oh, I see we've received a number of questions. Good. So the next one is, would workers who support the fishing industry through working in assessment or management be able to access any of the support targeting fishermen? Would that be one for you, Ryan?
Yeah. So sorry, just to clarify, I was trying to read it and then I didn't see it in there. So it was workers who support the fishery industry, but maybe aren't actual commercial fishermen, be eligible for the benefits. Is that a good summary of the question? So I think some of these programs are specific to the fish harvesters themselves, but certainly the support workers on the side or support businesses on the side of the processing, storage, and distribution, I think would want to investigate the Canadian Seafood Stabilization Fund. And then any of those who are self-employed on kind of the other side of the industry. So maybe if you're a self-employed boat repairs person who maybe has some work getting boats ready for before the season goes out, and now you've seen a decline in work, I think those people would apply for the normal SERB program, and then potentially, if they are eligible and have been filing tax returns and doing all that good stuff, could apply for the Canada Emergency Business Account if there's a need for some interim financing. So I think they would likely apply through the other programs that are already existing. The fishery specific programs are really a product of self-employed fish people and share people falling a little bit outside of the normal employment insurance and other rules. And as a result of that, there are some circumstances where they may not fit into the existing programs that other people do.
Perfect. Good. Thanks for that. And we actually have Ben Heisems from the Gitlach Miska Society. Sorry, the Gitlach Nisga'a Terra Society. And he just wanted to provide some comments that Gitlach has already secured its fishers and are awaiting delivery from its 2 contract fishermen. And they do have a website. It's www.gitlach-nisga'a-terra-society.ca. And there's information there for how citizens in the Terrace Miska urban local area can sign up for the 2020 salmon distribution. And they've already received a number of their members signing up, which is great. So just in relation to that, there's been some questions in relation to transport permits. So perhaps this is for you. Cheryl touched on it a bit, but Ed, maybe if you wanted to provide more information on that. The question was, how will transport permits for citizens who choose to gather food for personal harvest?
Thank you, Bobby. Unfortunately, I don't have a solid answer for that question. It's something that has come up more frequently as we're getting into the fishing season, and we are discussing avenues on how we can provide the transportation certificates to the fishers. And once we have that hammered out, and we need to do this quickly, we will put out an announcement through the communications department, and hopefully we can get that done within the next few days.
Okay, and again, another one in relation to permits and I guess the process. Do you need permits to take fish out of the valley, and is there a policy for this? You do need, as Cheryl mentioned, you do need a transportation certificate to take fish out of the valley. And that there is no policy, but it is in the Nisga'a Fish and Wildlife legislation. Okay, great, thank you. So that wraps up the incoming questions from our attendees this evening. Just opportunity for the panelists, if you have any closing commentary or any additional information you'd like to provide at this point.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. My apologies for my audio challenge this evening. It's good to have everyone here, and thanks to Bobby and Ryan and Cheryl and Ed for being here, and Darren. The information is coming in slow for us with the assessment with our fish wheel program, and we'll try and get as much out as we can. It was a slow start for our first week of the wheels, and it was a little slower than what we had anticipated. For example, we had 14 Chinook through the wheel to get 6 wheels, and it was 9 sockeye, which is very, very low numbers, but we're expecting more. However, that's we'll keep monitoring that, and of course staff are out on a daily basis to monitor, and we'll get that information out as best we can. We still have our weekly calls with Fisheries and Oceans reporting on our activities here. We're leading the activities. Edward is ahead of that with respect to all our staff. They're doing quite well. And so things are coming along for them now. And it's just now the fish to arrive, which will be great. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that, Harry. Any of the other panelists on closing commentary?
Yeah, well, just again, I'll say thanks to everybody for having me here and allowing me to participate in this. I think as everybody thinks about all these programs, and certainly seeing the extension of the SERB, it's important to remember the intent of the program, and so it's not necessarily intended to be a let's not go back to work program, right? We want to make sure these are all supporting people who are truly not able to go. So I think those are things to consider, and certainly if any of the programs, if you have questions about it, if you're receiving SERB and you're not sure if you should have or you should continue to, reach out to the various institutions involved and just ask the question. I think with any of these things, that proactive approach and asking questions is a great tool. There's a lot of great information on the NLG website, and also a lot of great information on the Government of Canada website. So I would encourage anybody who has more questions either to submit them, through the website or to this team, and to search the website and search Government of Canada site. Yeah, and thanks again for allowing me to participate.
And I'd like to thank everybody for attending as well, Bobby, and special thanks to our panelists here. There's a lot of knowledge that we've collected here tonight. So I just want to remind all the people out there that may have questions that we're always available, reach by email, and when things get back to semi-normal by telephone. But most people know some of our fisheries workers, and we're always happy to answer any questions. And if we can't provide the answers there, we will certainly try to get the answers.
Okay, great, thank you. Speaking of which, there's just one more question that popped up. So since we have a few more minutes, I'll entertain this. Again, in relation to transport permits, will transport permits be issued digitally or hard copy? Also, if hard copies are issued, will they be made available in each Nisga'a community in the valley?
Yes. So we certainly, as I said before, we need to develop a process and figure out how we're going to do this. But I assume that they would be by hard copy, since not everybody's hooked up digitally and don't necessarily have access to email, etc., and a printer. So I think that yes, that they would have to be made available in each of the communities as well. So that's off the top of my head, and hopefully we can get this sorted out shortly.
Just in support of Edward's comments, and we'll try not to hold people back with their effort to come and get their fish in the valley. It's important, however, that the data is collected, and also I believe that our enforcement team with Fisheries and Oceans will require, if there is a stoppage on a highway, or we will need a hard copy of the transport permit for be available. If it happens that there's a traffic stoppage during any day from now till September.
Okay, great. very important information. Thank you both. Cheryl, did you have any closing comments?
I'd just like to thank all of the panelists and for having me join you today, and for all of those who have participated in this webinar today. I know I've learned a few new things just by listening to the questions that were posed and the answers given, and hope that we continue to have the same participation in the upcoming webinars. Thanks, and have a good evening.
Thanks, Cheryl. Darren?
Thanks, Bobby. And once again, reiterate previous announcements made. I'd like to thank everyone for participating this evening. I just want to close by letting everybody know that Nisga'a government continues to engage with all levels of government to be as informed as we can with respect to COVID-19 related matters, insofar as they relate financially, at least through the finance department. And we're committed to conveying that information to you, both in a format like we've experienced this evening and again on our website. So I encourage you to visit our website from time to time for, excuse me, for frequent and updated current information. So once again, thank you, everyone.
Great, thanks for that, Darren. And speaking of which, following the first webinar where we primarily talked about SERB, we compiled a document with all of the incoming questions and also more general questions. So you'll see it's quite an extensive list of questions that both came in from participants in the last webinar. So feel free to check that out. And of course, with all of this evening's incoming questions, we'll do the same, and we'll add it to the website under the Fisheries section there. So please frequent the Nisga'a Nation website, and of course, federal and provincial governments on their programs and the guidelines for accessing them. So with that, we hope you've enjoyed this evening's webinar. Thank you for joining. And again, stay tuned to our website in the upcoming events section for information on how to participate in the webinars in the coming weeks. With that, I would like to call on Harry, now that he has audio, if he would do the kindness of closing our gathering in a word of prayer.
Thank you, Bobby. And now we'll just close into prayer. Father, getting some more dogs a minute, my yuk set gonna was say some yuk. Aliax will as the skill on as a mass at gonna not long in the mundane. Next, need Kaliax some listens, and next up need Xroxes mundane. Well, as the skill allows at Kaliax some listens, damn, and it's what. Nine with less set gun in small mundane. And next what I go, them well with next I go. Nisum good when I was Alamorton Jesus Christ and will Stumwilled.
Stumwilled. Good night, everyone.